The Millionaire CEO was at a restaurant with his fiancée when two little girls walked up and said, "You're our dad." The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and soft music drifting across the river outside its glass walls. Candlelight reflected across polished silverware, turning every table into a small island of warmth. Carlo Braun barely noticed any of it. He was focused on Trisha, the way she smiled when she teased him, the calm way she listened when he spoke. For once, he wasn't thinking about contracts or headlines, just the woman across from him and the future they were planning together. "You always get serious when you talk about weddings," she said, tilting her head. "Only because I want it to be perfect," he replied. She laughed softly. "Perfect is overrated." Before he could answer, a quiet voice rose beside him. "You're our dad." The words landed like a glass set down too hard, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Carlo turned slowly. Two little girls stood next to his chair, hands clasped together as if they had rehearsed the courage it took to walk across the room. One held a pink backpack that brushed against her knees. The other watched him with wide, hopeful eyes. For a moment, he didn't speak. Trisha's fingers paused around her glass. She wasn't alarmed, just surprised, her gaze moving between Carlo and the girls as she tried to understand what had just changed. "I'm sorry," Carlo said gently, unsure whether he had heard them correctly. "Our mom showed us pictures," the smaller one said. "It's you." The world around the table faded into a quiet blur. Conversations continued in the background, but they felt far away, like another life moving forward, while his had suddenly stopped. Carlo leaned forward slightly, careful with his tone. "Hey, I think there might be a mistake," he said, though even he wasn't fully convinced. The older girl shook her head with calm certainty. "We've been looking for you." Trisha watched him closely, searching his expression for answers he didn't yet have. She reached under the table and squeezed his hand, a small gesture that steadied him more than any words could. A woman hurried toward them, breath catching as she reached the table. "I'm so sorry," she said, placing a gentle hand on each girl's shoulder. Carlo recognized her instantly. Zena Borer, memories he had locked away years ago pressed against the surface of his thoughts, not painful, just unfinished. "It's okay," Trisha said softly, offering a reassuring smile to the girls before looking back at Carlo. Her voice carried warmth rather than tension, and that calm presence kept the moment grounded instead of chaotic. Zena's eyes met his. There was no accusation there, only quiet honesty. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked. Carlo hesitated, glancing at Trisha. She nodded once. "Go," she whispered. "I'll be right here." As Carlo stepped aside with Zena, the room felt smaller, more intimate, like the rest of the world had dimmed around them. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. "They're 7, she said, her voice steady. "And they believe you're their father, 7 years. The number echoed in his mind. Maybe you've had a moment like that, when life feels carefully planned, steady, predictable, and then one sentence shifts everything. What would you do? Pretend you didn't hear it? Ask for proof? Or listen, even when you're not ready? Carlo ran a hand through his hair. "Why now?" "They saw you in an article," Zena said. "They started asking questions I couldn't avoid anymore." He looked back at the table where Trisha sat with the girls, speaking to them softly. She didn't look angry. She looked curious. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," Zena added. "I just want honesty for them." That was the problem. He didn't know what honesty looked like yet. Carlo returned to the table slowly. The girls looked up at him as if he were someone they had always known. Not a stranger, not a celebrity, just a person they had been waiting to meet. He crouched to their level. "What are your names?" he asked. "I'm Elvira," said the older one. "And I'm Novella," the younger added, her voice bright with excitement. "It's nice to meet you," he said, and he meant it. Novella tilted her head toward Trisha. "Are you his princess?" Trisha laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Something like that." The tension softened. Conversation began to move. Simple topics, small smiles. They talked about school, drawings, favorite cartoons. Carlo found himself listening more than speaking, trying to understand the space he had just stepped into. But beneath the warmth was a quiet question that wouldn't leave him alone. Who am I to them, and who do I want to become? Because this wasn't just a surprise. It was a turning point. A man who had built his life around control suddenly faced something he couldn't plan for. 2 children who believed he belonged to them. Dinner continued, slower now, filled with cautious laughter and gentle curiosity. Trisha's calm presence helped everyone breathe again. She asked the girls about their drawings, praised their creativity, and somehow turned an awkward moment into something kind. When the evening ended, Elvira hugged Carlo without hesitation. "Will we see you again?" she asked. He glanced at Trisha. She didn't answer for him. She simply met his eyes, trusting him to choose. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'd like that." Outside the restaurant, the river lights shimmered across the pavement as Carlo and Trisha walked side by side. "You didn't sign up for this," he told her. She slipped her arm through his. "I signed up for you," she replied, "and loving someone means accepting the unexpected parts too." He let out a slow breath, unsure whether he felt afraid, hopeful, or something in between. If you've ever watched a life change in one moment, if you enjoy stories about second chances, unexpected family, and the choices that shape who we become, stay with me. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and tell me what you would have done in Carlo's place. Because this story didn't begin tonight. It began long before the restaurant, before the success, before the life he thought he understood. 1 hour earlier, the restaurant overlooked the river like a quiet promise. Light moved across the water in slow ribbons, reflecting through tall glass walls and settling gently over every table. Conversations stayed low, respectful, as if everyone inside understood that moments shared here mattered. Carlo Braun arrived first. Not as a CEO stepping into a meeting, just a man adjusting the sleeve of his jacket while waiting for the person who knew him before success changed his world. When Trisha walked in, he stood automatically. She smiled when she saw him, that familiar warmth reaching her eyes before anything else. No dramatic entrance, no grand gesture, just comfort, the kind built over years. "You're early," she said, sliding into her seat. "You always say that like it's a bad thing," he replied. "It's not bad," she teased. "It just means you're nervous." He laughed under his breath. "Maybe I am." The waiter poured water, the soft clink of glassware filling the small pause between them. Outside, the river moved steadily, unaware of the quiet turning point that would soon arrive. Trisha studied him for a moment. "You've been working too much again. That obvious?" "You get this look," she said gently, "like your mind is still somewhere else." He reached across the table, brushing his fingers against hers. "Not tonight." Menus rested untouched between them as they talked, not about business deals or public appearances, but about the future. "So," Trisha began, "are we still planning the big wedding you keep talking about? You make it sound dramatic," he said with a small smile. "It is dramatic," she replied. "You suggested fireworks." He shrugged lightly. "I like memorable moments. I like quiet ones," she said, leaning forward. "Maybe something smaller, somewhere peaceful." Carlo listened carefully. That was always their balance. His instinct for grand gestures, her preference for meaning over spectacle. "What matters most to you?" he asked. "That we're present," she said, not distracted by expectations or other people's opinions. Her answer stayed with him. For a man used to planning every outcome, the idea of simply being present felt both calming and unfamiliar. A group at the nearby table laughed, the sound soft but genuine. The restaurant carried a peaceful rhythm. Forks against plates, glasses lifted in quiet toasts, the distant hum of music blending into the background. "Remember when we used to talk about traveling instead of settling down?" Trisha asked suddenly. "We still can," he said. "Nothing says we have to choose one path forever." She watched him carefully. "You say that, but you've been building a life that looks very fixed lately." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a sip of water, considering how much of himself he wanted to reveal. "Success makes people assume you have everything figured out," he said finally. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still catching up to my own life." Trisha's expression softened. "That's the most honest thing you've said all week." Their meals arrived, the conversation slowing as they tasted the first bites. "You know," she said, "when I read interviews about you, it always sounds like your life started the day your company became successful." "That's what people like to hear," he replied quietly. "But it's not the full story, is it?" He hesitated. Carlo rarely talked about the years before recognition, the uncertain time when he was building something fragile and trying to understand who he wanted to become. "Some chapters don't feel relevant anymore," he said carefully. "Or maybe they're just harder to explain," she suggested. He met her gaze. She wasn't pushing him, she was inviting honesty. "There were people back then who knew me differently," he admitted. "Before everything changed. Do you ever miss that version of yourself?" The question lingered. "Sometimes," he said. He had fewer expectations to live up to. Trisha nodded, accepting the answer without pressing for details. That was one of the things Carlo valued most about her. She allowed silence to exist without trying to fill it. Outside, a boat passed along the river, its lights reflecting across the glass. The moment felt calm, grounded, like the start of a memory that would stay with them long after the evening ended. Dessert menus appeared, and Trisha laughed when Carlo immediately pointed to the most elaborate option. You always pick the richest thing on the list, she said. I believe in enjoying life, he replied, especially when I'm not rushing between meetings. You say that now, she teased, but give you 10 minutes and you'll be checking emails again. He raised his hands in surrender. Phone stays away tonight, I promise. She leaned back in her chair, watching him with quiet affection. You've changed a lot, you know. In a good way, in a determined way, she said. You carry more responsibility now, but sometimes I wonder if you've let yourself slow down enough to feel everything. He smiled faintly. That sounds like something you've been thinking about for a while. Maybe, she admitted. I just want the person I love to enjoy his own life, not just manage it. Her words landed gently but meaningfully. He reached for her hand again, holding it longer this time. You keep me grounded, he said, even when I forget to slow down. A waiter refilled their glasses. Somewhere near the entrance, the door opened briefly, letting in a soft rush of cooler air before closing again. Carlo didn't look up. Not yet. As dessert arrived, Tricia leaned forward, resting her chin lightly against her hand. So, she said, hypothetically, if life surprised you tomorrow, would you be ready for it? He laughed. That's a very specific hypothetical. Just answer, she said. I think I would try to face it honestly, he replied after a moment, even if I didn't understand it at first. She smiled. That's why I trust you. Their conversation drifted into comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need constant words. The restaurant felt safe, familiar, a place where important decisions could be made without pressure. Then the entrance door opened again. 2 small figures stepped inside, holding hands. They paused near the host stand, scanning the room as if searching for someone important. Tricia noticed them first, her attention shifting briefly toward the entrance. Carlo continued speaking, unaware of the quiet change about to reach their table. If you've ever had a peaceful moment interrupted by something completely unexpected, you know how quickly life can shift direction. Tell me, have you ever felt like everything was steady right before a surprise changed your plans? Stay with me, because the calm you're seeing now won't last long. The girls began walking toward them, and within seconds, the evening that started as a celebration would become the beginning of a completely different story. The 2 girls moved through the restaurant slowly, their hands linked together as if they shared one quiet decision. Conversations continued around them, forks lifted, glasses tilted towards soft laughter, yet something about their presence shifted the air without anyone fully realizing why. Tricia watched them first, not because they were loud or disruptive, but because they walked with purpose. The older one guided the younger gently, whispering something that made her nod with determination. Carlo was still speaking, describing an idea he had for their honeymoon, somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, far from headlines and expectations. Just us, he said, smiling. No schedules, no cameras. That sounds perfect, Tricia replied, though her eyes flicked back toward the approaching girls. They stopped at the edge of the table. For a second, nobody moved. The younger girl adjusted the strap of her pink backpack, while the older one looked directly at Carlo with a calm confidence that didn't match her age. You're our dad, she said softly. The words didn't echo loudly through the room, but inside Carlo's mind, everything fell silent. Carlo turned toward them slowly, his expression caught between confusion and careful politeness. I'm sorry? He asked, his voice gentle but unsure. The smaller girl nodded eagerly. Our mom showed us pictures. It's you. Tricia's hand stilled around her glass. She didn't react with shock or frustration, only quiet curiosity. Her gaze shifted from Carlo to the girls, noticing the sincerity in their faces. No one at the table rushed to fill the silence. It stretched just long enough for uncertainty to settle in. I think you might have the wrong person, Carlo said, choosing his words carefully. But the older girl shook her head. We looked everywhere, she said. You were hard to find. That sentence carried more weight than she realized. Carlo's pulse quickened. A memory stirred, not clear, not fully formed. Just a distant feeling that the past he had closed away was no longer willing to stay quiet. Before he could respond, footsteps approached from behind the girls. I'm so sorry, a familiar voice said. Carlos stood instinctively. Zena Boer reached them, slightly out of breath, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and calm strength. She rested her hands gently on the girl's shoulders. They didn't mean to interrupt, she added softly, but Carlo knew this wasn't simply an interruption. It felt like a chapter returning to ask a question he had never answered. Hi, she said kindly to the girls. I'm Tricia. Are you his princess? Novella asked immediately. The question pulled a soft laugh from Tricia despite the tension. Something like that, she replied. Her calm tone helped the moment breathe again. Zena met Carlo's eyes. Years had passed since they last spoke, but the familiarity between them remained undeniable. There was no anger there, only quiet honesty. Can we talk for a minute? She asked. Carlo hesitated, The restaurant suddenly felt smaller, the world outside the windows moving at a different pace than the one inside his chest. He glanced at Tricia. She nodded gently. "Go," she said. "I'll stay with them." Her confidence steadied him more than any reassurance could have. As he stepped away with Zena, he felt the weight of two small gazes following him, hopeful, trusting, and completely unaware of how complicated this moment felt. They moved toward a quieter corner near the windows, the river lights flickering across the glass behind them. "What's going on?" Carlo asked softly. Zena took a breath before answering. "They're 7 now," she said, "and they believe you're their father." The number settled between them. 7 years. A lifetime in some ways, a blink in others. "I didn't know how to reach you after your company grew," she continued. "Your world changed so fast." Carlo rubbed his temple, trying to process everything at once. "Why tell me now?" "They saw you in an article last week," she said. "They recognized your face. They started asking questions. I couldn't avoid any more." He looked back toward the table. Tricia was speaking with the girls, her posture relaxed, her smile patient. She listened to Novella describe something with animated gestures while Elvira watched carefully, as if measuring every reaction. "What do you want from me?" Carlo asked. "Just honesty," Zena replied. "For them, not for me." The simplicity of her answer left him without a clear defense, because honesty meant stepping into uncertainty, something he wasn't used to doing without a plan. Carlo walked back slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The girls looked up when he approached, their faces brightening in a way that felt unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. He lowered himself to their level. "What are your names?" he asked gently. "I'm Elvira," the older one said. "And I'm Novella," the younger added, swinging her feet slightly. "It's nice to meet you both," he said. Tricia watched him carefully, her eyes warm. She didn't interrupt or guide the conversation. She simply allowed the moment to unfold. "What do you like to draw?" she asked the girls. "Princess castles," Novella said proudly. "And dragons." Carlo found himself smiling despite the confusion swirling inside him. Dinner continued, slower now, shaped by small conversations instead of big plans. The girls talked about school and favorite stories. Zena listened quietly, giving them space while keeping a protective eye on their reactions. Under the table, Tricia squeezed Carlo's hand. "You're doing fine," she whispered. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. "You don't have to know yet," she said softly. "Just be here." That simple advice grounded him, because this wasn't a problem to solve immediately. It was a moment to experience, one that carried more meaning than he could fully understand yet. If you've ever faced a surprise that changed how you saw your own life, you know how quiet decisions begin, not with certainty but with presence. "Tell me, would you have stayed at the table? Or walked away?" The girls laughed at something Tricia said, and for a brief moment the tension lifted. But Carlo knew this was only the beginning, and the questions waiting ahead would ask more from him than success ever had. The restaurant felt quieter as Carlo and Zena moved toward a corner near the windows. Outside, the river reflected long bands of gold from the city lights, steady and calm, the opposite of the thoughts racing through his mind. He folded his arms loosely, searching for the right place to begin. "I need to understand," he said. "Why now? After all this time?" Zena didn't rush to answer. She watched the water for a moment before turning back to him. "Because they started asking questions I couldn't answer alone," she said. "And I didn't want to lie to them." Her voice carried honesty, without accusation. That made the moment heavier somehow. Carlo leaned against the railing, remembering a younger version of himself, uncertain, ambitious, trying to build a future that didn't yet exist. Back then, life had been full of choices he never fully examined, because everything moved so quickly. "I thought we left things." "Understood," he said carefully. "We did," she replied. "At least I believed we did." He nodded slowly. The past wasn't something he revisited often. Success had pushed him forward, filling his days with goals that left little room for reflection. But standing here now, he realized that some decisions never fully fade, they simply wait for the right moment to return. "Do you remember that small cafe near the university?" Zena asked quietly. He let out a short breath. "Of course, that's where we used to plan everything." Back then, they had talked about possibilities, ideas that felt distant and uncertain. He had been driven, focused on building something meaningful. She had believed in him before anyone else did. "We were different people," she said. "We were," he agreed. Her gaze softened. "I didn't tell you about the girls because I wasn't sure how your life would change, and when it did, it felt like you were already moving in another direction." Carlo didn't argue. He remembered the chaos of those early years, endless work, new opportunities, decisions made quickly because hesitation felt like failure. "I never meant to disappear," he said. I know, she replied gently. That's why I'm not angry. The simplicity of her words caught him off guard. She wasn't here to accuse him. She was here to open a door he didn't know existed. He glanced back toward the table again. Trisha sat with Elvira and Novella, listening to them with genuine interest. The girls leaned toward her easily, as if they already trusted her warmth. That woman with you, Zena said softly. She seems kind. She is, Carlo replied without hesitation. And she knows about your past? Some of it, he admitted. Not everything. Zena nodded, understanding without judgment. That's the hard part, isn't it? She said. When life grows bigger than the stories we tell about it. Carlo ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what they expect from me. They don't expect anything complicated, she said. They just want to know you. The simplicity of that statement felt heavier than any demand, because knowing someone meant showing up, consistently, honestly, not just stepping in for one moment and disappearing again. What if I can't be what they need? He asked quietly. Zena met his gaze. Then you start by being yourself. They stood in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the conversation settle. Inside the restaurant, laughter drifted from another table. A waiter passed by carrying a tray of desserts, the soft clink of plates grounding the moment in something ordinary. You look different, Zena said after a while. Older? He joked lightly. No, she said. More careful, like you carry the expectations of a lot of people. He considered that. Maybe I do, he admitted. But tonight feels different. I'm not thinking about business or reputation. I'm just trying to understand where I fit into all this. She smiled faintly. That sounds like the Carlo I remember. Her words stirred a quiet warmth he didn't expect. Not nostalgia, just recognition. The past wasn't something to regret. It was simply a part of who he had been, and maybe who he still was beneath everything else. Whatever you decide, Zena said gently. I don't want you to feel pressured. They already have a good life. I just didn't want to keep them wondering. Carlo nodded slowly. That honesty mattered more than any explanation. He looked back at the table once more. Elvira was showing Trisha a drawing from her backpack. Novella laughed at something only she understood. Trisha listened patiently, her presence steady and welcoming. For the first time since the girls approached him, Carlo felt a quiet shift inside his chest. Not fear, not confusion, but curiosity. Maybe this wasn't a problem to solve. Maybe it was a chance to grow into something new. Let's go back, he said. As they returned to the table, he noticed how easily the girls' faces brightened when they saw him. That simple reaction carried more meaning than any business achievement he had ever celebrated. He sat down slowly, unsure of what to say next, but certain that this conversation had already changed him. It was sitting across from him, asking to be seen, and for the first time in years, Carlo felt less like a man controlling every outcome and more like someone stepping into a story he couldn't predict, but might learn to embrace. When Carlo returned to the table, the atmosphere felt different from before, softer, more open. Trisha sat angled toward the girls, listening as Novella described a drawing she had made at school. Elvira watched quietly, observant in a way that felt older than her years. Carlo pulled his chair back but didn't sit immediately. Instead, he lowered himself so he was closer to their height. What were you two talking about? He asked gently. Princess castles, Novella said, holding up a folded piece of paper like it was a treasure. And dragons that guard the doors. That sounds important, he replied. Elvira studied him carefully. Do you like drawing? I used to, he admitted. Mostly when I needed to think. She nodded, accepting that answer with a seriousness that made him smile. Zena took her seat quietly, giving the girls space to speak for themselves. Trisha shifted slightly so Carlo could sit beside her again, her shoulder brushing his in quiet reassurance. For the first time since the girls arrived, conversation began to move naturally, not forced, not tense, just small exchanges that slowly built familiarity. So, Trisha said to Elvira, what's your favorite subject at school? Science, she answered immediately. I like learning how things work. Carlo raised an eyebrow. That sounds familiar. She wants to be an inventor, Zena added with a soft smile. Elvira shrugged shyly but didn't deny it. And you? Carlo asked Novella. Art, she said proudly. And recess? That's an honest answer, he laughed. The girls relaxed as the conversation continued. They spoke about their friends, a teacher who always wore bright scarves, and a class project that involved building tiny houses from cardboard. Carlo listened more than he spoke, letting their personalities unfold at their own pace. Every laugh, every curious glance toward him felt like a small bridge forming between strangers. Trisha leaned closer to him and whispered, You're doing well. I'm just trying to keep up, he murmured back. You don't need to impress them, she said softly. Just be yourself." Her words grounded him again, because for once this wasn't about leading a room or presenting confidence. It was about connection, something quieter and far more personal. Halfway through dinner, Novella slid out of her chair and walked around the table toward him. "Can I sit here?" she asked, pointing to the empty space beside him. Carlo hesitated for a second, surprised by the ease of her request. "Of course," he said. She climbed into the chair and immediately began explaining her drawing, her voice animated and bright. Elvira watched from across the table, a small smile forming as if she had expected her sister to take that step. Zena observed silently, her expression thoughtful but calm. Tricia rested her chin on her hand, watching Carlo with quiet pride. The way he leaned closer to listen, the way his voice softened when he responded, it revealed a side of him few people ever saw. "You ask good questions," Elvira said suddenly. He looked up. "Do I?" "Most adults just say, 'That's nice,' and stop listening," she explained. Her honesty made him laugh. "Then I guess I have a lot to learn." For a moment, the weight of the earlier conversation faded. The table felt lighter, filled with the ordinary warmth of shared stories and small jokes. And in that ordinary warmth, something inside Carlo shifted, a sense of belonging he hadn't expected to feel so quickly. As plates were cleared, the conversation slowed again. The girls grew quieter, their energy settling into a comfortable rhythm. Elvira traced a small circle on the tablecloth with her finger before looking up at him. "Are you really busy all the time?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I try to make time for the people who matter." She nodded thoughtfully, as if storing the answer away. Novella leaned against his arm without hesitation, her trust simple and unguarded. "Do you read bedtime stories?" she asked. "I used to," he said, remembering evenings long ago when life felt slower. "Why?" "Because ours always end too soon," she said with a small pout. Tricia laughed softly. "That sounds like a challenge." Carlos smiled, though a deeper thought lingered beneath the surface. These weren't just children meeting someone new. They were inviting him into pieces of their world. School days, bedtime routines, small moments that made up their everyday lives. And he realized that connection wasn't built through grand gestures. It grew through simple presence. The waiter brought dessert, placing small plates in front of everyone. Novella clapped her hands in excitement while Elvira tried to pretend she wasn't just as thrilled. Tricia raised her fork. "Okay, serious question," she said playfully. "Chocolate or fruit?" "Chocolate," Novella answered immediately. Elvira hesitated. "Both." "That's the safest answer," Carlos said with a grin. They shared bites, laughter flowing more easily now. Zena relaxed slightly, watching the interaction unfold without needing to guide it. Under the table, Tricia's hand found Carlos again. "How do you feel?" she whispered. He paused, searching for the right words, like everything changed, but not in a bad way. She squeezed his hand. "That's a good place to start." As the evening moved toward its close, Elvira looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Will we see you again?" she asked. The question hung gently in the air, not demanding, not desperate, just hopeful. Carlo glanced at Tricia, then at Zena. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have certainty, but he felt something steady growing inside him. "Yes," he said softly. "I'd like that." Novella smiled so brightly it made everyone at the table laugh. And in that simple moment, the tension that had entered the restaurant earlier transformed into something new, the beginning of a connection that felt real, unexpected, and quietly meaningful. If you were sitting at that table, would you have opened your heart this quickly, or kept your distance a little longer? Let me know what you think, because Carlo's journey is only just beginning, and the choices ahead will shape more than his future. A few days later, Carlo stood near the park entrance earlier than planned, hands tucked into his coat pockets as he watched families move along the walking path. The air carried the faint sound of children laughing somewhere beyond the trees, and for once he wasn't thinking about deadlines or meetings waiting on his desk. He checked his watch, then looked up just as Elvira and Novella appeared with Zena. Novella ran ahead first. "You came," she said, her excitement bright and immediate. "I said I would," he replied, kneeling slightly to meet her at eye level. Elvira walked more slowly, offering him a thoughtful smile. "Mom said you're very busy," she said. "I try to make room for important things," he answered. Tricia arrived a few minutes later carrying a small blanket and a paper bag filled with snacks. She greeted the girls warmly, settling onto the grass while they began showing Carlo their newest drawings. The park felt different from the elegant restaurant, more open, more ordinary. And in that ordinary space, conversation flowed easier. They talked about school projects, favorite games, and the tiny details that made up the girls' everyday lives. Carlo realized something quietly surprising. He wasn't performing or trying to impress anyone. He was simply listening. Novella insisted on showing him the playground slide, tugging gently at his sleeve until he followed. Careful, Trisha called from the blanket, laughing. She's very persuasive. That's an understatement, Zena added. Carlo climbed the small steps beside Novella, feeling slightly out of place at first. But when she reached the bottom of the slide and looked up at him with pure joy, he couldn't help but laugh, a sound that felt lighter than anything he had experienced in years. Elvira sat nearby, sketching quietly. Trisha joined her, asking questions about the drawing without interrupting her focus. She likes quiet moments, Zena said softly to Carlo as they watched. I can see that, he replied. You're doing well, she added after a pause. He glanced at her. I'm still figuring it out. That's enough, she said. As the afternoon stretched on, the girls began treating him less like a stranger and more like someone who belonged there. Novella told jokes that didn't quite make sense but made everyone laugh anyway. Elvira explained how she wanted to build something that helps people solve problems faster. Carlo listened, noticing how easily time passed when he wasn't measuring it. Weeks turned into a quiet rhythm. Carlo started leaving work earlier on certain days, scheduling park visits or short dinners where the girls could talk about school and show him their latest projects. Art supplies began appearing on his kitchen table, markers, paper, half-finished drawings that stayed there long after they left. One evening, Novella handed him a picture of 4 stick figures holding hands. That's us, she said proudly. He studied the drawing, noticing how she had placed Trisha beside him and Zena slightly behind the group, smiling. It's beautiful, he said honestly. Trisha watched from across the room, her expression warm. You've changed, she told him later that night as they cleaned up together. In a real way, she replied. You're not rushing through moments anymore. He considered that. For years, success had meant moving forward quickly, always focused on the next goal. Now, evenings felt slower, filled with conversations that didn't need to lead anywhere, and he realized he wasn't losing control of his life. He was learning to live it differently. One afternoon, they spread a blanket under a large tree while the girls worked on a craft project. Do you like princess movies? Novella asked Trisha suddenly. I love them, she said. Then you're definitely his princess, Novella declared with complete certainty. Carlo laughed, shaking his head. You've decided that already? Elvira looked up from her drawing. It's obvious, she said simply. Zena watched the exchange quietly, her expression thoughtful but peaceful. Over time, the distance between her and Trisha softened into something respectful. 2 people connected by a shared goal, making sure the girls felt safe and supported. I didn't expect this to feel easy, she admitted. It doesn't feel easy all the time, he said, but it feels right. She nodded, understanding the difference. Because the connection growing between them wasn't built on obligation. It came from small, consistent moments. Laughter, shared meals, honest conversations that slowly replaced uncertainty with trust. Months passed, and Carlo's evenings began to look different from the life he once knew. Board meetings still filled his days, but after work he found himself helping with homework, listening to Novella practice reading aloud, or watching Elvira carefully assemble small inventions from spare parts. One night, as the girls packed up their things to leave, Novella paused at the door. Can we come back tomorrow? She asked. He smiled. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. She nodded, satisfied with the answer, and hugged him tightly before running to join her sister. When the door closed, Trisha leaned against the counter beside him. You look happy, she said softly. He thought about it for a moment. The word felt simple, yet deeply true. I think I am, he admitted. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the windows, reflecting a life that looked very different from the one he had imagined months ago. Not perfect, not predictable, but filled with moments that mattered more than any plan he had ever written. If you were in Carlo's place, would you have allowed your routine to change this much or tried to keep everything exactly the same? Because the path he's walking now will soon bring new challenges and decisions that will test how deeply he's willing to commit to this new version of himself. The rhythm Carlo had built with the girls felt natural, almost effortless, until the outside world began to notice the changes. It started quietly. A colleague mentioned that he had been leaving the office earlier than usual. A meeting ran longer than expected, forcing him to cancel a park visit he had promised Novella. Small disruptions at first, the kind he would have ignored months ago. But now, every change carried weight. He stood in his office late one evening, staring at the skyline beyond the glass walls. Papers sat neatly arranged on his desk, contracts waiting for signatures. His phone buzzed with reminders, deadlines, interviews, investor calls. Yet his thoughts drifted elsewhere, to a drawing Elvira had left on his desk that morning, to the way Novella had asked if he would come to her school presentation next week. Success had always demanded his attention. Now something else did too. And for the first time, he wondered if the 2 parts of his life could truly exist side by side. The shift didn't stay private for long. A short article appeared online mentioning that Carlo Braun had been seen spending time with 2 young girls at a park. The tone wasn't harsh, Just curious, but it was enough to spark speculation. His assistant placed the tablet on his desk. "They're asking questions," she said gently. "Nothing serious yet." Carlos skimmed the headline and exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. His life had always been visible to the public in ways he couldn't fully control. Later that afternoon, a colleague approached him in the hallway. "You've been keeping secrets from us," the man joked lightly. Carlos smiled politely but didn't elaborate. He had learned long ago that not every part of his life needed to be explained to the world. Still, the attention lingered in the back of his mind as he left the office early to meet the girls at the park. Novella ran toward him the moment she saw him. "You made it," she said, throwing her arms around his waist. In that instant, the noise of public curiosity faded. What mattered wasn't what strangers thought. It was the promise he had made to be present. That evening, after the girls left, Carlos stood on the balcony with Tricia. The city stretched below them, lights glowing against the dark sky. "You've been quiet tonight," she said, leaning against the railing beside him. "Just thinking," he replied. "About work?" she asked. "And everything else," he admitted. She waited, giving him space to speak when he was ready. "I used to believe I could separate my life into neat pieces," he said finally. "Work here, personal life there. Now it all feels connected in ways I didn't expect." Tricia nodded. "That's what growth looks like sometimes. It makes things more complicated before they become clearer." He turned toward her. "Do you ever feel like you didn't sign up for this?" Her answer came without hesitation. "I signed up for you," she said softly, "and the version of you I see right now feels more honest than ever." Her words eased something inside him, because the pressure wasn't just about the world watching. It was about whether he could become the person these new relationships needed him to be. A few days later, Carlos sat alone in his office, after everyone else had gone home. The city outside moved steadily, unaware of the questions running through his mind. He thought about Elvira's curiosity, the way she asked thoughtful questions about everything she saw. He thought about Novella's laughter, how easily she trusted him. And he wondered whether he deserved that trust yet. His phone buzzed with a message from Zena. "They had a great time today. Thank you for coming." He read it twice before replying. "I'm still learning, but I'm glad I was there." Moments later, another message appeared, this time from Tricia. "Don't forget to rest. You don't have to carry everything alone." He smiled faintly. For years he had believed strength meant handling everything himself. Now he was beginning to understand that strength could also mean allowing others to stand beside him. The next weekend, the girls visited his office for the first time. Novella ran through the wide hallway, her voice echoing softly. "You work here all day?" she asked, eyes wide with wonder. "Most days," he said. "That sounds exhausting," Elvira added seriously, making him laugh. They explored conference rooms and looked out from the tall windows at the city below. Tricia watched from a nearby chair, smiling as the girls asked endless questions about everything they saw. One employee paused in the doorway, surprised by the scene. Carlo noticed but didn't feel the need to explain, because in that moment he realized something important. The pressure from the outside world would always exist. Headlines, expectations, opinions from people who didn't know his story. But the real challenge wasn't managing public perception. It was learning to balance the life he had built with the life that had found him unexpectedly. As the girls gathered around his desk, Elvira placed a small invention she had made beside his computer. "It's supposed to help people remember important things," she said shyly. He picked it up carefully, studying the tiny details she had added. "I think it's brilliant," he told her, and as she smiled, he felt a quiet certainty begin to grow. The stakes weren't about losing success or facing criticism. They were about choosing who he wanted to be when no one else was watching, a leader, a partner, and maybe something more than he had ever imagined becoming. Because the decisions ahead would ask him to step beyond comfort and into commitment, and soon he would have to decide just how far he was willing to go. The office felt unusually lively the day Elvira and Novella visited again. Employees who were used to quiet professionalism found themselves smiling as the girls walked through the hallway, their curiosity filling the space with a lighter energy. Novella stopped near the large window, pressing her hands against the glass. "It's so high up," she whispered. Carlo stood beside her. "When I first moved here, I thought the view would make everything feel bigger," he said. "But sometimes it just reminds you how small you are in the world." Elvira looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you like feeling small?" He considered the question before answering. "Sometimes it helps you see what truly matters." Tricia watched from across the room, noticing how naturally he spoke now, not as someone trying to impress, but as someone comfortable being seen honestly. That change didn't happen overnight. It grew slowly through every shared moment, every quiet decision to show up. Later, while the girls worked on drawings at a conference table, Carlos sat with Tricia near his office door. "You remember when success meant closing deals faster than anyone else?" she asked softly. "I remember thinking that was everything," he said. And now? He glanced toward the girls. Novella was explaining a colorful sketch while Elvira carefully adjusted tiny pieces on a small project she had brought. Now success feels quieter, he said. Less about winning, more about being present. Tricia smiled. That sounds like growth. He leaned back in his chair, watching the scene unfold. The office no longer felt like a place that separated him from life outside. Instead, it felt like a space where different parts of his world could exist together. For the first time, he didn't feel pulled in opposite directions. He felt balanced. As the afternoon faded into evening, Elvira approached him holding a small notebook. I made a list, she said. A list? He asked. Things we could do together, she explained, flipping through pages filled with neat handwriting. Not just park visits, maybe building something, or reading stories. Her voice carried hope, but also patience, as if she understood that trust took time. Carlo studied the notebook, feeling the weight of what she was offering him. This wasn't a request for perfection. It was an invitation. He looked at Tricia, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. All right, he said, smiling. Let's start planning. Elvira's face lit up, and Novella clapped her hands excitedly. In that simple agreement, Carlo felt a shift inside himself, a quiet decision forming. He wasn't just visiting their lives anymore, he was stepping into them. That evening after the girls left with Zena, Carlo and Tricia walked slowly through the city streets. You didn't hesitate today, she said. I realized something, he replied. I've spent years planning every outcome, but some of the best moments lately have come from not knowing exactly what comes next. She slipped her hand into his. That sounds like someone learning to trust the process. He laughed softly. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, she said. It's just worth it. They paused near a small cafe, watching people pass by. Couples talking quietly, families walking together, strangers sharing small moments that made the city feel alive. Carlo turned toward her. Are you sure you're okay with all of this? The changes, the uncertainty? She met his gaze steadily. I don't need life to be simple, she said. I just need it to be honest. Her answer settled deeply in his chest. Because honesty was exactly what he was learning to choose, not just with others, but with himself. Weeks later, Carlo found himself rearranging his schedule without hesitation. Meetings shifted, deadlines adjusted, not recklessly but thoughtfully. He attended Elvira's small science presentation at school, standing quietly in the back while she explained her invention with confidence. Novella waved at him from across the room, her smile bright enough to make him forget every email waiting on his phone. Afterward, they walked through a nearby garden, petals scattered along the path from an earlier event. Did I do good? Elvira asked. You did more than good, he said. You were brave. Novella tugged on Tricia's sleeve. When you get married, can we throw flowers like this? Tricia laughed softly. Maybe you'll have a very important role. Carlo looked at her, surprised by how natural that future felt now, not as a distant plan, but as something real and close, because somewhere along this journey, he had stopped asking whether he could handle the unexpected. He had started asking how deeply he was willing to commit to it. And as they walked together beneath the fading sunlight, he realized that choosing who he wanted to be wasn't a single dramatic decision. It was a series of quiet choices, showing up, listening, staying present, until one day those choices shaped an entirely new version of his life. Spring arrived quietly, bringing warmer air and longer evenings that seemed to slow time just enough for reflection. The garden chosen for the ceremony sat at the edge of the city, filled with soft greenery and rows of white chairs arranged beneath flowering trees. Carlo stood near the entrance, adjusting his cufflinks while guests began to arrive. The setting wasn't extravagant. It was simple, intentional, exactly what Tricia had hoped for. He glanced around, noticing how calm everything felt compared to the busy life he once thought defined him. There were no flashing cameras, no overwhelming crowds. Just close friends, familiar faces, and a sense of quiet anticipation. Elvira and Novella appeared first, dressed in soft pastel colors, carrying small baskets filled with petals. Novella twirled once, her excitement impossible to hide. Do we start throwing now? She asked. Not yet, Carlo laughed. You have an important job later. Elvira stood beside him more calmly, watching the guests settle into their seats. You don't look nervous, she said. I think I already passed the nervous part, he replied. What's after that? She asked. He smiled, grateful. Music drifted softly through the garden as Tricia walked toward him, her expression steady and warm. She wasn't rushing. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who understood exactly what this moment meant. Carlo felt a stillness settle over him, not overwhelming emotion, but a deep awareness of how much his life had changed since that evening at the restaurant. The officiant spoke gently, inviting everyone to focus on connection rather than tradition. The words were simple, grounded in honesty rather than grand declarations. When it was time for vows, Tricia looked at him with the same calm smile she had worn the first night everything changed. "You once told me you like grand gestures," she said softly. "But the moments I cherish most are the quiet ones. When you listen, when you stay, when you choose to grow instead of retreat." Carlo took a breath before answering. "You've shown me that love isn't about having all the answers," he said. "It's about being present, even when life surprises you." The guests listened quietly, the garden filled with a sense of warmth that didn't need dramatic words to feel meaningful. When the officiant invited Elvira and Novella forward, Novella nearly skipped down the aisle, scattering petals with enthusiastic energy. Elvira followed more carefully, placing each handful with intention. Tricia laughed softly as petals landed near her shoes. "This might be my favorite part," she whispered. Carlo watched the girls with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Months ago, he hadn't known they existed. Now they stood at the center of one of the most important moments of his life. Zena sat among the guests, her expression calm and peaceful. When their eyes met briefly, she offered a small nod, not dramatic, not emotional, just quiet acknowledgement of how far everyone had come. The rings were exchanged without elaborate speeches. Carlo slipped the band onto Tricia's finger, realizing that the meaning behind the moment came not from ceremony itself, but from everything that had led them here. As applause rose from the guests, Novella clapped louder than anyone else. "You did it," she exclaimed. Tricia laughed, pulling her into a gentle hug before taking Carlo's hand again. After the ceremony, guests gathered around small tables beneath the trees. Conversations flowed easily, filled with laughter and stories about how Carlo and Tricia had grown together over the years. Elvira sat beside him, quietly sketching the scene in her notebook. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "Everyone together," she said. "I don't want to forget this day." He watched her carefully outline the figures, Tricia standing beside him, Novella dancing nearby, Zena talking with friends in the background. "It's beautiful," he said. Novella tugged at his sleeve. "Come dance," she insisted. "I don't think I'm very good at that," he replied. "That's okay," she said confidently. "Neither am I." Tricia joined them, laughing as they moved awkwardly but happily across the small dance floor. For a moment, Carlo forgot about expectations and simply allowed himself to enjoy the simplicity of the celebration. He realized then that happiness didn't need to be perfect to feel complete. It just needed to be shared. As the sun began to set, the garden filled with golden light. Guests slowly gathered their things, offering hugs and quiet congratulations before leaving. Carlos stood near the edge of the path, watching Tricia speak with Zena while the girls chased each other through the grass. "You look thoughtful," Tricia said, joining him a moment later. "I was just thinking about how different life feels now," he admitted. "In a good way?" she asked. "In a way that feels real," he said. "I used to measure success by numbers, by achievements. Today, it feels measured by moments." She slipped her hand into his. "That sounds like someone who's finally letting himself feel everything." He nodded slowly, because standing there, surrounded by the people who had shaped this unexpected chapter of his life, he understood something he hadn't before. The greatest changes didn't arrive with dramatic announcements. They arrived quietly, through small decisions, shared laughter, and the courage to open your heart to a future you never planned. And as the garden lights flickered on above them, Carlo realized that this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a life that felt deeper, steadier, and more meaningful than anything he had ever imagined. Months after the wedding, Carlo's days carried a different kind of balance. Mornings still began with meetings and decisions that shaped his company's future, but evenings no longer felt empty once the office lights dimmed. He picked the girls up from school whenever he could, listening as Novella talked about playground adventures while Elvira described new ideas she wanted to build. Their backpacks filled the back seat, bright drawings and notebooks sliding onto the floor whenever they laughed too hard. At home, Tricia arranged art supplies across the dining table, turning ordinary evenings into small creative sessions. Zena visited occasionally, the atmosphere between them calm and respectful, not complicated, just honest. Carlo noticed how naturally these moments blended into his routine. Success still mattered to him, but it no longer defined the entire picture of who he was. One evening, Elvira handed him a small card she had made. "Thank you for listening," it read in careful handwriting. He placed it on his desk the next morning, a quiet reminder of how much life had changed since that night at the restaurant. A journalist reached out requesting an interview, hoping to talk about Carlo's evolving personal life. Months earlier, he might have declined or offered a brief statement prepared by his team. This time, he agreed. The interview took place in his office, sunlight reflecting off the windows behind him. "People have noticed you've become more private lately," the journalist said. "I think I've become more intentional," Carlo replied calmly. "There are parts of life that deserve protection. Do you feel your past complicates your public image?" He paused, considering the question. "My life isn't perfect," he said finally. "It's about learning and growing. The people who matter to me remind me that success isn't just about achievement, it's about connection." The journalist nodded, clearly expecting a more dramatic answer, but Carlo didn't feel the need to explain every detail. His truth felt steady enough without long speeches. "How did it go?" she asked. "I just told the truth," he said. "That's always enough," she replied. Nearly a year after that first unexpected meeting, Carlo stood outside the same restaurant by the river. The glass walls reflected the evening light just as they had before, but this time he wasn't alone. Tricia walked beside him, her hand resting lightly against his arm. "It feels strange coming back," he admitted. "Strange in a good way?" she asked. He nodded, like revisiting the start of something important. Inside, the staff greeted them warmly and guided them to the same corner table. The familiar view brought back memories, the surprise, the uncertainty, the quiet courage it took to step into a new chapter. "This is where everything changed," he said softly. "And where it all made sense later," Tricia replied. Before he could answer, laughter echoed near the entrance. Elvira and Novella rushed toward the table with Zena following behind, smiling at their excitement. "We remember this place," Novella said, climbing into her seat. "It's our favorite restaurant now," Elvira added proudly. Carlo laughed, realizing how different this moment felt compared to the first time they stood here. No confusion, no hesitation, just warmth. Dinner unfolded with easy conversation. The girls shared stories from school, Zena spoke about a new project she had started, and Tricia listened with her usual calm attentiveness. At one point, Elvira looked at Tricia thoughtfully. "Thank you for loving our dad," she said, handing her a handmade card decorated with tiny stars. Tricia's eyes softened as she hugged her gently. "That means a lot to me," she replied. Novella leaned toward Carlo. "You look happier here now," she said. He smiled. "I feel happier." The river outside shimmered beneath the evening lights, reflecting a quiet sense of closure. The restaurant no longer felt like a place where uncertainty began. It felt like a space where growth had come full circle. Zena raised her glass lightly. "To unexpected beginnings," she said. "To unexpected family," Tricia added. Carlo lifted his glass last, and to choosing kindness even when life surprises us. The girls clinked their glasses together, laughing as if the moment had always been meant to happen this way. As the evening ended, they stepped outside beneath glowing streetlights. The air felt cool and calm, carrying the gentle sound of water moving along the riverbank. Elvira walked beside Carlo, her notebook tucked under her arm. "Do you think life keeps changing like this?" she asked. "I think it does," he said, "and that's what makes it interesting." Novella skipped ahead with Tricia, pointing at reflections dancing on the pavement. Zena paused near the entrance, watching the group with quiet satisfaction before joining them again. Carlo looked around at the people walking beside him, the woman who chose him every day, the two girls who had turned one quiet dinner into a new beginning, and the shared understanding that had grown between everyone involved. If you were standing there, would you have imagined how much could change in a single year? Tell me, which moment do you think shaped Carlo the most? Was it the first surprise, the slow routine that followed, or the decision to stay present no matter how uncertain things felt. Because even though this chapter feels complete, one final reflection remains, a quiet ending that brings the journey back to its heart. The night felt calm as they walked along the river path, the glow of streetlights stretching across the pavement in long reflections. The restaurant behind them faded into the background, leaving only the sound of soft laughter and steady footsteps. Novella skipped ahead, trying to step only on the brightest patches of light. Elvira walked closer to Carlo, her notebook tucked safely under her arm, as if it held pieces of the day she didn't want to forget. Tricia slipped her hand into his, her touch warm and familiar. "You're quiet again," she said gently. "I'm just thinking," he replied. "About work?" He shook his head. "About everything that started here and how different life feels now." She smiled. "Different doesn't always mean complicated." "No," he said softly. "Sometimes it just means fuller." They slowed near the water's edge, watching small ripples move across the surface. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt comfortable, not empty, but peaceful. Carlo watched the girls run ahead and realized how natural this scene had become. Months ago, he would have measured his evenings by how productive they were. Now he measured them by the moments that stayed with him long after the day ended. Elvira stopped suddenly and turned toward him. "Are you going to tell stories tonight?" she asked. "Only if you promise to help me finish them," he said. She nodded, satisfied. Novella tugged at Tricia's sleeve. "We should make hot chocolate when we get home," she suggested. "That sounds perfect," Tricia replied. Home. The word felt different now. It no longer described just a place or an address. It described the people walking beside him, their voices, their laughter, the quiet way they understood one another without needing long explanations. He glanced at Tricia, remembering the night he worried she hadn't signed up for this unexpected change. She caught his look and raised an eyebrow playfully. "What?" "Just grateful," he said. "For what?" "For you staying," he answered simply. They paused at a small bridge overlooking the river. The girls leaned over the railing, pointing at reflections dancing across the water. "You've changed," Tricia said softly. "In a good way?" he asked. "In a real way," she replied. "You don't rush through moments anymore. You let yourself feel them." He considered her words carefully. "I used to think control meant success," he said. "Now I think success is being able to stand here and know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "That sounds like peace," she said. Maybe it was. Not the dramatic kind people chase, but a steady feeling built through small choices, showing up, listening, learning how to grow without needing everything to be predictable. Behind them, Zena watched the girls with a quiet smile before joining the conversation again, the ease between everyone no longer surprising. This family didn't follow a traditional design. But it worked, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. As they began walking again, Carlo thought about the version of himself who once sat in that restaurant believing he understood exactly where his life was headed. He had measured success by numbers, achievements, and the approval of people who only saw part of who he was. Now success looked different. It looked like Elvira proudly explaining a new idea she wanted to build. It looked like Novella laughing so hard she forgot what she was trying to say. It looked like Tricia's steady presence beside him, reminding him that love didn't need grand promises to feel strong. And it looked like Zena's quiet strength, proof that growth didn't erase the past, it helped people move forward with understanding. He realized something important then. The greatest chapters of life rarely begin with certainty. They begin with moments that ask you to choose, to listen instead of retreat, to open your heart instead of protecting it too tightly. And every step he had taken since that first unexpected meeting had brought him closer to a version of himself he hadn't known he needed to become. They reached the car, laughter still lingering in the air as the girls climbed into the back seat. Tricia settled beside him, adjusting the music softly before they started driving. The city moved quietly around them, lights glowing against the night sky. Carlo glanced at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Elvira and Novella talking about their plans for the weekend. He smiled. Life wasn't predictable. It didn't follow careful plans or perfect timing. But sometimes the most meaningful changes arrived in the simplest way. Two small voices at a restaurant table, a question that shifted everything, and the courage to say yes to something unexpected. If you've ever experienced a moment that changed how you saw your own life, you know that growth doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels gentle, steady, and deeply real. So tell me, what part of Carlo's journey stayed with you the most? Was it the first surprise, the slow building of trust, or the quiet realization that family can take many forms? Because in the end, the millionaire CEO who once measured success by numbers learned to measure it by moments, by the people beside him, by the love that grew through patience, and by the life he chose to embrace one step at a time. And as the car disappeared into the glow of the city lights, The story closed not with an ending, but with a sense of calm, a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that happen quietly, far from the spotlight, in the spaces where love and growth meet. If this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Take a second to subscribe and become part of this storytelling family, where every journey is about growth, unexpected moments, and real connection. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and they help shape the next stories you hear. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Until next time, keep your heart open, because the most meaningful stories often begin when we least expect them.